Vance is hosting. Hello, everybody.
Yes. I wondered if there'd been any news on that.
Yeah, well, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live stream, our third in succession with myself, Piotr Kurzin, experience in diplomacy, international relations, and conflict. Michael Rossi, professor in comparative politics and Russo-related studies, and Professor James Ker-Lindsay, expert in statecraft, conflict, and security. I'm not in a particularly mess around mood today. In London at the moment, you have Lancaster House, which is where European leaders and EU leaders are meeting to discuss the future of international security and European security architecture as we know it. I want to make a couple of things off the bat, which is that it's quite stark for me, the disillusionment by which MAGA Americans seem to be obsessed in their idolization of Trump, and that no matter what he does, it is good.
Yeah.
And to the extent that they are willing to burn bridges to such a level of their allies and partners that have enabled America to be as powerful and prosperous as it has been. We need to stop being, I think, sort of rose-tinted in Europe, and we need to just get pragmatic. We have to treat every scenario from this case on as worst case, because we are in 6 weeks of this American administration, and it has gone further and deeper than I ever imagined it could. And Europe has a lot of waking up to do, and we need less rhetoric and more action at this point. I have a lot more to say, but I will pass it to you, gentlemen, to maybe get us started and talk about this, because I'm extremely, not good. So maybe you can add some levity, but I'm struggling to find any at the moment, James.
Yeah. Michael, why don't you kick off?
Do you want to flip
a US view on this? You know, how do we read this?
I mean, okay, I will start by saying that this past week was actually capped off with an incredibly important speech that many people had missed. But this was Jeffrey Sachs's talk at the European Parliament. That was the beginning of this past week. And it ended with the live streamed fiasco that was us witnessing Zelensky being thrown under the bus by both Trump and Vance.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time that my country has thrown an ally under the bus, and it will not be the last. But it was the first time that it was seen live for people. I mean, you know, people were just absolutely aghast at what was going on, just the absolute lack of diplomacy, almost to the point of it, devolving into a shouting match. And this came, through Tashkent time. It was really towards the end of the day. I was out. I wasn't really paying attention until I just, the Telegram was just, lighting up with all of this, with the videos. And I have to admit, for somebody who is probably among the three of us the least surprised that this happened, I am absolutely surprised that it happened the way that it did. And there is one small sliver of saving grace here that might play into Zelensky's favor. And that is that he came to Washington, to my understanding, to sign a ceasefire deal that ultimately would have handed over $500 billion worth of minerals and resources of Ukraine to the United States. And this completely collapsed. It absolutely deteriorated. To my knowledge, Zelensky left without signing the document that he was supposed to go in and sign. And if we are also to take what is coming out of Telegram at face value, Trump is now, A, no longer interested in this mineral deal, and B, has cut all ties and communication with the Zelensky government, which means that Zelensky can only play within the EU circles for some kind of diplomatic leverage.
James?
Yeah, so I was just getting to the end of a day editing my regular Friday video, which I try and keep separate from Trump. There are lots of other issues going on in the world, and we're forgetting about a lot of these. but this was such a huge development. I really couldn't believe what we were seeing playing out. And we're all battle hardened, if you like, in international relations. We've seen a lot of strange things over the years and stuff, but this just crossed all sorts of lines. And what's been really interesting is the sort of responses I've been getting on my comments to the video that I did. And literally, it was just, I can't believe what we've just seen. Switch on the camera and just speak into it and say, this is what I think has just happened. And I did actually go back to see exactly what had led up to it. And it was truly shocking. I can only conclude that this was an ambush. So people have been saying, oh no, it wasn't set up. Zelensky was incredibly rude. No, you could see that something was up. The fact that that hostile question from that journalist, to use the term loosely, talking about his clothing, that was the moment that if Vance or Trump had wanted to diffuse things and had been really serious about trying to engage in diplomacy, would have shut it down and said, listen, we're here to talk business, and made some sort of excuse. I mean, the fact that you've had Elon Musk standing in the Oval Office in a baseball cap and some T-shirt and weird jacket, and then speaking at a cabinet meeting, made this even more bizarre. I loved also the fact, and for all the terrible things of the internet, hallelujah, people finding pictures of Winston Churchill turning up at the White House during the height of the Second World War, wearing not even combat fatigue, some sort of strange work uniform or, workers' attire, that, really came out. And that's the Winston Churchill that Trump has just put his bust back in the Oval Office. So there was all that. And that all said to me that this was being set up. And it was like Vance just wanted that opportunity to say, you're ungrateful, and rile him. And I think one of the other things that I would really, and I think, Michael, you will be, both of you will be completely in sympathy on this one. I have been really, really quite appalled at how few people have really taken into account that Zelensky's first language isn't English. That here is somebody who speaks good English, but it's still something, it's still a bit of a struggle for him. He's under a lot of stress. He was under even more stress. And he just simply said, if Ukraine falls, you will feel it. In the sense of everyone's going to feel the consequences of this. And that was when Trump sort of shot off at him. Don't tell us how we're going to feel and everything like that. It just was an appalling display. And all I can think is that if either of those men had an ounce of compassion for what Zelensky's gone through or sympathy for Ukraine, they would not have responded in that way. So this, to my mind, was absolutely the clearest possible indication that they had no intention of helping Ukraine in all of this. I might be prepared to keep an open mind that it wasn't an ambush. I think it was, though. But as I say, anyone who had any sort of sympathy for Ukraine would have actually been a friendly audience to Zelensky in that meeting and said, listen, we have our concerns. United States taxpayers paying a lot of money to do this. We want to help you, but we've got to take this forward, and have kept it at that. And there was a press conference that was coming up later. They could have closed that sort of initial presser down, had a few photos, and they didn't. They let it play out, and it was shocking. It really was. And people are saying to me, "Oh, but this is realpolitik, this is diplomacy." Listen, I've been in the room. I'm not a newcomer to all of this. I've been in high-level talks. You don't see that sort of stuff. That doesn't play out in public, and it actually doesn't tend to play out in private. So,
there's a couple of things I would say to that, James. For the most part, Trump and Zelensky, when they spoke, it was quite plain. There's no love lost between those two. Trump doesn't care about Zelensky. He doesn't care about Ukraine. But he's not J.D. Vance. I don't like Trump, but I have an actual hatred for Vance. I think he is a vile, brutish individual who was there to push as much his own agenda in terms of taking MAGA and trying to form it, because he is seen by many people as the sort of, he will take up the mantle of MAGA after Trump. So this was as much about him trying to set his own personality and, this is the White House room. It is in front of the US media, global media, and the tension, pressure couldn't be higher. Zelensky has walked effectively into a lion's den. Yeah. I do think it was an extremely ill-advised thing to be there without someone who could maybe help with translation a little bit. I'm not defending at all, but I don't think Zelensky, perhaps, he was gaslit. Vance gaslit him. He baited him. And Zelensky, unfortunately, because of the pressure he's under, but he's also a president over a country that's in full-scale war, is inevitable that he might succumb to some degree of emotion and such. But again, I still think that if he could have been able to retain some composure and just not reply, right, just but hold your tongue, because if he'd held his tongue, then as soon as he said the thing about the feelings of the US, that triggered Trump. And as soon as Trump was triggered, it was a two-way tag team against Zelensky, and the whole thing was unsalvageable. It was a complete disaster. I knew it wasn't going to go well, but I had no expectation it would go as bad and at the rate that it did. And I don't think it was a good idea to go on Fox News. I know it was a scheduled interview. I know it was, some people see it as a good way for him to continue to try and, emphasize Ukraine's cause to particularly, Republican Americans. But I'm sorry, it was too soon. You had to let the dust settle before you then came on continuing, because I think it just fanned the flames in the eyes of the people who are either already anti-Zelensky in Ukraine or just skeptical. So I think that I'm not, again, protecting Trump or Vance, but I do think, unfortunately, Zelensky's, I mean, you saw the way that the ambassador to the United States for Ukraine was reacting, right? This was not the way that they wanted it to go. And I'm very concerned about the rate at which the relations can be restored to even a functional level. It comes down to the Europeans at this point. If Keir Starmer and Macron, who are leading this new coalition of the willing, or whatever it is, to somehow try to get a rapprochement, which we shouldn't even be in this place in the first place. The only person who won in that meeting was Putin and Russia's campaign. That's it. But Michael, you probably disagree with some of those points.
No, not really. No. I mean, we can, and the last couple of days, social media, YouTube, Twitter, Telegram has been going over and over, this deterioration in diplomacy. My first thought was, this is the kind of stuff that happens when the cameras are not rolling. The United States has had a long history of admonishing and putting in its place countries that they feel need to be grateful to us and need to either take our offer or leave it. I've promoted this book before, but I'll use this opportunity again for those that are listening. Stephen Kinzer's work, Overthrow, is an excellent analysis of a history of American-led regime change, starting with the Hawaiian monarchy in the 1850s, leading all the way up to the Second Gulf War in Iraq. And in all of this, the U.S. has, through secretaries of state, through secretaries of defense, through presidents, have admonished leaders the way in which Trump has admonished Zelensky. The only difference is that this time we were witnessing a country being thrown under the bus via Livestream. That was it. I knew 3 years ago when this war started that at some point Ukraine was going to be the biggest loser. And Trump just simply accelerated this. That was it. The Biden administration wanted to keep this losing war going for as long as possible. Trump decided to end it. And he does so in his own abrupt, narcissistic way. But it was very clear to Zelensky at that point that he has no friends in power in Washington. And we need to also understand the Republican Party has now come down behind Trump against Zelensky. Marco Rubio blames Zelensky for being undiplomatic. Lindsey Graham, a man who I hate more than you could ever possibly hate J.D. Vance, Piotr. Okay? A man who has made it a professional career of himself to be not just a bootlicker, but a boot deep throater, has come out and said Zelensky is ungrateful. He should have taken the deal. And why is this? Because for years, Lindsey Graham has been licking his lips, looking at Ukraine, realizing how much money the U.S. could make out of this. And the fact that Zelensky was going to Washington to sign that deal, that resources deal, with the hope and with the hope, I may add, that there would be military security guarantees from the United States, which Trump did not say. That was the reason why the shouting match happened, because Zelensky was thinking that the U.S. was going to provide some military protection for what was left of Ukraine. He was ready to sign that deal, which means that if he did, he would have probably never had been able to go back to Kiev, because he would have been public enemy number one for signing away Ukraine's resources as well as 20% of its territory. In a weird way, Zelensky was given a Hail Mary pass through Trump's own narcissism, which led him to reject the deal, and the whole thing just collapsed. This was a sigh of relief for the EU, because if Zelensky signed that deal, it would have been over. So, in that regard, I almost have to, applaud him. I mean, I feel for the man. I mean, he is the head of state of a country which has been invaded on one side and absolutely manipulated into a proxy war by the other. Regardless of what you think of the man, and yes, he was effectively goaded into a situation in which English was not his primary language is Russian, not even Ukrainian. And one account even mentioned that they caught him sort of almost under his breath muttering "suka biat" under his thing, which good for him.
Do you believe he said that?
Yes, I think he even said "suka biat." And
he what? Said bitch in front of the White House administration
under his breath. And if he did, he gets extra points for that.
But right? He was on camera saying it, Michael. So he didn't exactly say it well enough under his breath. If he did say that, I think that was an absolutely ridiculous thing to do.
Well, I mean, when you're that angry at what's going on,
doesn't matter. You have to play the game. This is where I
understand. I absolutely understand.
That's where James will probably differ and I. But at this point, Zelensky is coming to the US for help. He is looking for the continuation, and whether or not you believe that the meeting was staged and it was all with ill intent from the very beginning, it still doesn't mean, as I said before, Zelensky should have stopped himself. And I know how hard it must have been. I know I'm not pretending like I have any idea of what it would have been like, but the long-term consequences of this are it's an inflection point, as I said in a tweet or whatever on another stream. Like, the historians will look back at this century, and this moment on Friday night will be one of the singular events that changed so much of the international system that we've become accustomed to. It depends on how much the Europeans can salvage Ukrainian-US engagement, but also somehow navigate their relations with the Americans at this point, because I'm just trying to be pragmatic now. I care about Europe's survival and prosperity at this point. America is big enough to manage on its own. It will obviously not do as well without more allies and partners, but Europe is not. And we need to be much more cognizant of that and proactive in ensuring our own, independence, autonomy, and prosperity, right? James, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, look, there's so many elements to all of this. I think sort of the thing that I've found most disturbing in responses to this are essentially there's only two broad voices that seem to be cheering Trump on after what happened on Friday night. It's either, as was pointed out, the hardcore maggots who just Trump can do no wrong, who are so insular in their thinking that they have absolutely no awareness of how that appeared to the US closest friends and allies. And I have to say that what they don't realize is that those who were most appalled by that and have been most critical are in fact friends and allies of the United States, because the other category that seems to be cheering Trump on are those who absolutely understand the damage that it's done and are delighted by it. And it really does boil down. Those can be the only two explanations for anyone who's defending what happened on Friday night. And I hear what you're saying, that you can say that Zelensky could have played it a bit better. But I come back to the initial point that anyone with any sort of sympathy, empathy, compassion, call it what you want, for Ukraine and the position that Zelensky finds himself on, would have made the necessary allowances.
But
and
James,
not
sorry
launched
to
into
jump in
that.
on that point, but this is Trump and Vance. You're trying to apply.
No. But Piotr, this is what I'm saying. That's the point I'm making, that this is Trump and Vance. But even they, if they had gone in with a positive attitude in any way towards Ukraine,
they never would have.
That would not have played out in the way that it did.
They never would have done. Why are you even humoring that scenario? They never would have done. It's fucking Vance. He's the most deplorable individual I've had the pleasure.
I mean, it really. I mean, Trump is whatever, but I think a lot of people agree that Vance is vile. He's evil. That really was a show. But that's the point I'm making, because a lot of people. I saw somebody in the comments saying, "Oh, this is I'm all into conspiracy theories and stuff." I don't know what's conspiratorial about saying that quite clearly looked like an ambush. It was all set up, because if they were genuinely committed to trying to help Ukraine, they would not have let that play out in the way that it did. Trump could have stopped it at any moment and just said, "Thank you, everyone. Been really great. We'll see you for the press conference."
He's not that invested in it. He can't be bothered.
That's the point I'm making. But that's exactly the point that I'm making, isn't it? I'm saying exactly that. So anyone who would argue that the US in any way was trying to play a straight bat, as we would say in England, on this, that was completely disproven by what happened. So all of this is not conspiratorial thinking. It's just logically applying a group of things to say, and this is the heart of policy analysis. Let's break it down. Let's look at all these other factors so that it isn't just pulled out conspiracy theory, but it is actually, let's look at the evidence. And we've got all sorts of evidence there for saying that this behavior.
But James,
it was designed to humiliate.
You are a dot of whatever, white in a sea of black, or some kind of metaphor, in the sense of you are, and Michael, two people who take the time to look at the nuance, to understand that geopolitics and international relations is anything but black and white. But the deliberate manipulation of people, not even Vance or Trump, but the people who support them so unconditionally, like David Sachs, of the All In podcast, the sellouts, the suck-ups, even Marco Rubio, who very clearly was not comfortable with the situation. He's cowering.
Gosh, his body language was shocking, wasn't it?
The whole room to swallow him up. The whole floor.
It was. It literally. Anyone who hasn't seen it, Piotr, absolutely go back and look at this. He was absolutely slouched in that sofa.
But he is such a sellout with the posts on X and social media he's been putting in terms of his, support and alignment with Trump and his actions, right? He is a spineless suck up with no moral integrity whatsoever.
Well, I have to say that his tweet that he put out afterwards was so fawning that part of me thinks it was parody, that he's got to play the loyalty game at this stage. But even you can't. I mean, anyone who hasn't seen it, go and look at that. I mean, I really think it was parody. I think the question is how long he stays in post. And it was really, I was watching a great interview with John Bolton, and for anyone old enough watching this from the time of the Iraq War in 2003, will remember that John Bolton was the most hawkish of the neocons. This guy was legendary for being, just US has got to look out for itself. And now, I mean, all right, he's had his falling out with Trump, but if he was signed up to the MAGAT agenda, he wouldn't have had that falling out with Trump. And he is actually becoming, and a voice of reason in a lot of this on the American right. He's representing that nationalist view in America that says what Trump is doing is absolutely dangerous. He understands that fundamentally, US leadership, he wants the US to be a leader in the world. But to do that, it's got to have allies. And what he's watching and saying is that this Trump is now presiding over America's not only internal collapse, but foreign policy collapse, because it's alienating the allies that it needs. And so when you've got people like, and a lot of people are saying this, when you find yourself agreeing with John Bolton, you're finding yourself in a very, very strange place.
The post I saw from Mike Pence, right?
And Mike Pence, absolutely another really good.
When I look at Mike Pence for sort of upstanding illustrations of better morals amongst Republicans, Michael, you probably have some things you want to say.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, who would have thought that we would have been in a place, who had on their bingo card some people thinking that John Bolton or Mike Pence were the voice of reason. I mean, both, as far as I'm concerned, deserve a tribunal at Nuremberg, and we need to rebuild Spandau just to put them in there for the rest of their lives. But I mean, to kind of move this along here, I guess the thing I want to talk about more so is this comes as I said, at the end of the week of Jeffrey Sachs's talk at the European Parliament, which, if you have not seen, I absolutely recommend to everyone here, the viewers, us here, the panelists. It's brilliant. And I think is the most shocking thing about what Sachs said is that it confirms everything that Putin, Lavrov, Glenn Deason, John Mearsheimer, among others, have said about American foreign policy and NATO's expansion. Generally, since the collapse since the end of the Cold War, and more specifically since the Munich Security Conference that Putin had spoken at in 2007. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not Russian propaganda. This is Jeffrey Sachs we're talking about, right? One of the most respected American economists and policymakers who has a vested interest in building post-communist Eastern Europe since the 1990s. The very same Jeffrey Sachs, mind you, who published in January 1990 in The Economist an article appropriately titled in English, "What is to be Done?" which, if you know Russian, you know this symbolic allegory. This is an article by Sachs that effectively coined the program of neoliberal shock therapy for the newly emerging states of Eastern Europe. So for the godfather of shock therapy to effectively do a 180 over the years, and this is a man who has openly stated his support and endorsement of politicians like Bernie Sanders in the United States. He has almost done a full 180 mea culpa. He is effectively saying to the European Parliament, Europe, this is your moment once again to cut the cord. I know that it's a traumatic breakup with the United States, but the mask has come off. Biden wore the mask quite well. The mask slightly came off with George W. Bush. Trump pulled the mask off, and you saw what the U.S. was. Do not rely on us for global peace. The United States is out for its own. I said this last week to you guys. I said, do not trust us, especially under Trump. Europe needs a united foreign policy. The problem with this is that which Europe? The UK? Germany? France? Italy? Poland? Heaven help us, the Baltics? We're talking about the European Union. It is not a united organization. It is made up of 27 countries, of which a couple, maybe 3 or 4 speak on behalf of the entire organization. If there ever is going to be a time for true European unity, this is the moment. But it's also going to have to come with a number of painful realizations. One in which the war in Ukraine is lost. Russia won. And in order for Europe to move forward, you have to swallow your pride and reestablish communication with Moscow. Talk with Putin, talk with Lavrov. The more that you continue to engage in this sense of cognitive dissonance, that one more package deal to Ukraine, one more sanction deal is going to cripple Russia, is a fool's hope. And countries like Poland, the Baltic states, which were absolutely dependent on American support within NATO, which gave them, in Sachs's opinion, in which I absolutely agree, some grotesquely irresponsible things that they did in antagonizing Russia, as well as antagonizing the Russian-speaking populations of their own countries, mind you. Now they're afraid. Now they are deathly scared. So, you know, the story about if Russia wins in Ukraine, the Baltics are next, Romania is next, Moldova is next, whatever it is. I mean, most of this is, I have to say, largely done for internal propaganda in the EU. I mean, Russia does not have that capability, but what Russia can do is make life quite difficult for the three little belligerent Baltic states, which have really annoyed their big neighbor to the east. And now they need something to look for. In this regard, the best way forward for Europe, this ultimately is a what now thing. My opinion, and I agree 100% with Sachs on this, is that Europe needs to formulate its own foreign policy, recognize that it is now its hour once again, and make some kind of modus vivendi with Russia and salvage whatever can be salvaged, with Ukraine.
Okay, there I'm going to differ and quite.
Oh, here we go.
strongly.
I told the viewers it would get spicy, so hold
Yeah,
on to your
no,
butts.
I don't think. Listen, I keep seeing these comments about it's time for peace. Anyone in their right mind would want peace, but, and I keep saying this, and it's really quite incredible after 3 years how many people don't understand the significance of the Ukraine war. This is not a normal war. This isn't two countries having a bit of a scrap over a border. This is so much more than that. It will utterly redefine international relations for the 21st century. And we are in a situation that where if we get to a stage where Putin is effectively handed the territory of Ukraine, that this opens up a very, very different world for us all. And I see these comments from Ukrainians, and I actually do believe in this. And listen, I don't have to prove my credentials of having been involved. I've been involved in enough peace processes in my career that, I want to see peace, but I also understand that what we are opening up here is the potential for a very, very different world where might is right, a return to 19th century. We will all be so much more insecure if Putin wins this war. So it's not a question of let's have peace in Ukraine. It's a question of Ukraine is actually fighting at the front line of a war that in 100 years ago would have been a full-scale world war by now.
So
what is happening is that Ukraine is fighting for something much, much bigger. Now, call me an idealist in that sort of sense, but I don't want to see a return to that 19th century realpolitik. And we're already seeing how those norms have been broken down. We're now seeing more and more countries making threats against neighbors. And that this has been normalized, that Trump is doing it, that, and I've mentioned before what we saw with Venezuela and Guyana. These are examples of where this is becoming. And so I don't think that there is an accommodation to be reached with Putin's Russia. I really don't think there is. I think that this is too important. I mean, to my mind, and I hate doing this because it's Godwin's law, about Nazis, all the rest of it. But you can't discount it. This sounds like in the middle of the Second World War saying, let's have an accommodation with Hitler. And I really, really don't like to say that because it does sound so outrageous to our ears. But if you look at Ukraine as a systemic war in the same way that the First World War was and the Second World War was, then you realize that this is so much more than that. And as I say, I'm not prone to doing this. Conflict is what I do. I've spent 30 years studying it. This is a systemic war, and it needs to be treated as a systemic war by all concerned. And I think that, the complaint has been made. I would agree, Michael, on that. On Europe hasn't woken up to the fact that this is a systemic war. And I think that had it been treated in that way, there would have been a lot more that would be thrown in, that you could have actually had a much quicker putting Russia on the ropes on all of this. As it happens, we are where we are now. But I just don't see, when people talk about peace, what they're talking about. What is this peace that they're talking about? Because I don't see peace. I see a fundamental threat to the international system that all of us, our children and potentially grandchildren, will be living with.
So I want to make a couple points on this, because I think, as I said before, I want to be practical at this point. Not saying that you're not, James or Michael, but like sort of in the sense of it's time to
what do we do then?
It's time to get action orientated, right? Enough reactionary outrage and sort of inspiring words from European leaders, because Europeans are very good at making good points that carry morals and idealistic values, but Europe has been too complacent and too entitled for too long, be that on US security assurances, Russian energy, or Chinese markets, right? Europe has prospered without enough of our own ingenuity, in some ways, innovation. We are a very wealthy continent. We've got a lot of human capital, but it's not only because of our own initiatives, right? And we need to be more self-sufficient at this point. We need to take ownership of the future, but also be realistic with what we can do and how.
I think there are a very clear set of things that can be done.
Well, if I can just finish my point, James, because at the moment, the realistic nature is, it is difficult to see what Europe can do to dissuade Putin, or to fully combat the Kremlin's ambitions at the moment. The EU has the economic capacity, sure, but we don't have the military capability in terms of the security architecture the United States has provided via NATO over the whole of the continent is just not something Europe can replicate, right? So Europe still has to maybe play the game of doing deals with Trump that they provide logistical support, whilst the Europeans take up more of the sort of offensive or defensive kinetic side of military activity, if that makes sense, right? Because I just don't think the Europeans are ready to be able to manage this counterbalance with the Russians entirely alone yet. We can over time, but that's not going to happen, by the end of this decade even. So I'm trying to manage. I think it's about managing expectations, and unfortunately, I do think Michael has a point about having to engage the devil in some ways. I don't want to, but I'm not entirely sure how. But can we sustain the conflict, right? Can we sustain Ukraine's defense without America? I'm not sure we can. And so if we don't even just talk to Putin and he continues to press, yes, you can talk about Russia not being able to make advances into Eastern Europe. I get that point. But I am worried about the longevity of European support to Ukraine without considering what happens, without the US there, basically the backstop, right? So the last thing I would say on a moralistic standpoint, which I want to make very clear as a Brit, is the UK has an important decision to make. If the UK wants to be seen as a genuine moral arbiter of, stand up things and support of Ukraine, we must rescind the invitation to Trump for a second state visit. If we don't, then we are hypocrites. We are sucking up to the United States when we're preaching about, all the values that we have, but yet we're still going to invite the guy who is selling out Zelensky in Ukraine in that way. It doesn't look good for the British.
And claiming Canada, after all.
Yeah. Yeah.
The British King Charles has now got to welcome somebody who is openly talking about annexing a Commonwealth realm. King Charles is King of Canada as well.
Yeah. So
from that, no, Piotr, can I just, Michael, I'll sorry to interject on this one, but just while the train of thought is there, you say, so what can be done? And I think what you're doing is seeing this in very military terms. And I agree, we've got to make that
Well,
calculation.
what else is there?
Yeah, there is a lot more. That there is an economic dimension to this, and you hit the nail on the head. Europe isn't terribly, it's got to get its act together on military. We know that, and that now is being recognized. But it is an economic powerhouse, and there is a lot more that can be done with sanctions. There's a lot more that can be done to tighten up those sanctions. There are still too many European companies that are trading through the back door with Russia, supplying parts, equipment. The message needs to go out to that. If you engage in that activity, you will be put on trial. To the CEOs of these companies, we know that you know what's going on, and that you're suddenly getting big orders from Azerbaijan. We know exactly what that's doing. And speaking to countries like Azerbaijan and saying, listen, you will be put under sanctions if you don't. So you've got to make the trade. Are you dealing with Russia as an economic partner, or are you dealing with Europe as an economic partner? There is also 300 billion of Russian assets sitting in Europe. Now, up until now, I have been on that camp that said, listen, I don't think we should be touching that. I think that it crosses a certain line. I think that now we have got to seriously consider this, because the evidence does seem to be that, yes, Russia is making advances on the military battlefield, very heavy losses to do it, but they are, we've got to accept the reality of that. But the Russian economy, really, all the evidence says that is now teetering. It really is. Another year of this, 18 months of it cannot sustain. This is the moment that Europe says, right, okay, we do what we can on the military. We help Ukrainians hold the line as much as they possibly can. And we go all in on the economic warfare.
Yeah,
and to
James,
really bring it down and change the dynamics there. And that
but we don't have
Europe
another
to
year.
its advantage.
Look at what's happened in 6 weeks. I don't think another 18 months or 12 months is going to be.
No, I mean, the estimates suggest that if Russia continues at that pace, it's going to take 88 years or something. I was listening to yesterday of saying it's slow pace. Yes, they're making advances, but Ukraine is an enormous country.
Yeah, but the problem is that this is going to go backwards because the Americans are doing deals with Putin, and that's going to make the Russian economy more resilient. And so any idea of the Russian economy,
well, that's where you've got to go in, and Trump is a deal maker. You talk the language of Trump, and you say, right, okay, you don't want to be paying Ukraine anymore, but you've got a lot of industries which are doing very well. Are you going to cut everything off to them? And do you think Russia is going to be able to give you the money for that? I just think at this stage we've got to be pragmatic about it, but not in the way of just signing on the dotted line and allowing Putin to win this.
Obviously not. But I am so skeptical about the capacity of the European economics to be as overarchingly influential as the Americans, right? Sanctions of the US carry far more influence than European sanctions do, mainly because half the time Europeans can't agree on getting sanctions across because you need universal agreement, right? Consensus. And with the Hungarians or Slovakians being an impediment to that, I worry that the EU as a sanctions machine is not going to operate well.
And how's that going to play out in US domestic opinion when it's suddenly opening up to Russian products and things? Is Trump going to lift the tariffs on those? And what is Russia producing? What excess capacity has it got for a lot of things? I think Europe is a much more valuable market for the Americans, and Europe should learn to talk to Trump and say, listen, we've and frankly, if it takes that 300 billion, it says to Trump, listen, you want a bonanza of 300 billion. We've got a lot that we can be buying now.
I agree, but I'm still skeptical based on sanctions being one of my specialties. The history has taught us that they're not exactly effective unless left long enough, like in apartheid South Africa, or done as part of a broader policy toolkit as we've seen in Liberia.
That's what I was saying. It's got to be a wider toolkit. And it's Europe using that economic leverage, not just to keep the sanctions on Russia, but talk to other countries and say, you now have got to make this choice. Which side do you stand on?
But I'm still fearful that it's a bit idealistic. That's all I'm saying. I don't know.
And Europe could go to China, and Europe has got a very different position. Now, I am not. I worry about China in some ways as well, but from a European perspective, just as you've got a lot of the maggots saying, well, Ukraine's not our problem. We don't worry about Russia. Well, here in Europe, we do worry about Russia, but we don't worry about China in the same way. That looks a long way away from us.
Well, we really are in crowd cuckoo land if the Europeans are going to the Chinese for sort of.
Well, they are. I mean, we do trade with them after all. I mean, look how many
what
products
does that
you're
tell us about
buying
the
and
state
things.
of the world, mate?
I'm not saying realignment. I'm not talking about a military alliance with the Chinese. Nobody is talking about that. But saying that the threat that Europe faces,
how the European supporter, like, what is going on there? Oh my god!
Yeah, but the threat Europe faces from China feels very different. Looked at from Europe, most Europeans would say, what is that immediate threat? We're not under. Eastern Europe feels fundamentally under threat from Russia. How many people in Europe feel fundamentally at threat from China?
So if we can, I want to get Michael in because I know he's probably itching at the.
Yeah.
He's wearing his. Are you wearing a t-shirt again? The same one?
No, just a black t-shirt. Nothing.
Just change. You haven't got your Marxist. Yeah.
No logos. No nothing. I was wondering whether I was.
But we need to have. I mean, Piotr, you said what are solutions? Be pragmatic. Don't be idealistic. Well, those are the pragmatic solutions.
If I can summarize your last point, James, and then Michael, I want your opinion on this because it probably plays into some of what you want to say anyway, which is, so what, Europe has to do the dirty deals of sort of engaging the Chinese as much as the Americans for economic activity.
No, I think you're overplaying what I said about China. What I'm saying is that we need to get across to the United States that, look, you regard China as your big threat. We see China very differently. You don't see Russia as a threat. We do. So let's converse about this. If you want it, and we've got a Chinese-Russian alliance going on at the moment, if you want to put China under pressure, that Trump really wants to do, Europe says to United States, you need our help on that as a massive market. You need to recognize our concerns about Russia and have that pragmatic power language that Trump will understand. So it's a quid pro quo on this.
So you're talking about a quintessential realist theory of just purely interests, forget the values, because Trump doesn't adhere to those same kind of values anymore.
No, I'm saying actually it's a realist, but it's protecting the values, because I think most would say that Russia and China have values that we need to be concerned about. No, I'm talking about a realist approach.
Yeah,
to actually defend. I mean, I think it would be different if I was saying let's go to Trump and gang up against Australia and New Zealand as allies. Then you could say this is realpolitik.
Which realist interpretation would it be? Kenneth Waltz? What, a structural realist approach to this? Because it's more about
it's realism. No, I'm just simply saying that, listen, we have got to consider, people, I'm hearing all of this. People are saying, well, what is the alternative then to peace? These are the alternatives. Europe uses its economic power. It learns to talk to Trump in the language that Trump really understands and makes it transactional and says.
So do you think, therefore, there's a difference between the Europeans protecting and more building up the defenses against a hypothetical another Russian or Putin offensive versus them taking the fight to Russia, so to speak, right? Is it more about building the defensive deterrence capabilities than it is actually sort of offensive?
Well, nobody in their right mind would be talking about Europe launching an attack on Russia. I mean, that nobody in their right mind, because then you're talking, it is a nuclear at that point, and nobody doubts that. What I'm saying is that when people say Europe's weak politically and militarily and what is the answer? Well, Europe leverages where it is very strong indeed, which is economic. And I hear all the arguments it's divided, but that's the whole debate that's been had this weekend. It's playing out right at the moment. Anyway, Michael, look, I mean, as I say, I've sort of said a lot on this.
The European Parliament in Brussels on Thursday about some of these things. We need to get into government, guys, I think. Anyway, Michael, sorry. I know you want.
We've been talking about. I mean, if there's any way of capping this last week's series of events, actually from the last 2 to 3 weeks, from Vance's talk at the Munich Security Conference to Sachs's address at the European Parliament to the realization, very, very, starkly, that the United States is deviating from what Europe had expected it to do. The big question is, what can Europe do? Well, we can wax lyricals about what Europe can do. James is saying that Europe needs to play to its strengths and use its economic power as a way of bringing in China. over Russia, and then, bargaining with the United States that this is, how we operate. The other is the more realist approach, which is, cut your losses, realize that you're late to the game. You don't have to agree to territorial concessions over Ukraine, which I agree with as far as James is concerned. I mean, once again, we always have to put the little footnote of Kosovo, since that has happened, although Kosovo is not a recognized international country, and it never will be. So there's always that thing that leaves it up there. But I absolutely understand where James is coming from, in the idea that he started out by sort of disagreeing with me, but this whole idea of, agreeing to territorial concessions. No, I mean, I absolutely agree, is that this opens up an entirely new scenario of reality that I don't think we are ready to deal with. But ultimately, the question then is, what can Europe do? And what Europe most likely will do is, what do we have? We have the meetings of the heads of state of the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Poland. Meeting in London, if I'm not mistaken, over what to do. Zelensky came to London and was basically, almost given, group therapy.
They're meeting right as we speak, Michael. They're about 20 minutes away from me. They're having the discussions as we speak.
All right, and in all likelihood,
you know what they're to cancel so that I could be down there. Sorry,
well, you know what they're going to do. But you know what they're going to do? They're going to continue more of the same, is what they're going to do. They're not going to do anything else. They're going to continue to kick the can down the road because, God forbid, these are countries that are, governed by, the ideological principles of liberalism, which if we suddenly deviate the way that Trump did, we give in to the bad guys, right? Good loses, evil wins. This is how they see the world. They have codified Zelensky into this paragon of democratic virtue that is defending Europe against the hordes of the barbarian East. Right? Borel's garden is being defended by Ukraine from the jungle that is eastward of that. I mean, this is effectively how they see it. They're not going to see it any way differently, at least for now. The other thing we have to take into account here is that we've already said Europe is not united. There is no federal government in Brussels. So who speaks on behalf of the European Union is, I have to say, a beleaguered group of political elites that are increasingly out of touch with many of the ordinary people who want an end to the war, who are not in favor of the sanctions, who are upset with the rising prices in energy. And while I'm not saying that the Orbáns and the Ficos and the Vučićes of Europe are going to take over, it is noticeable, it is telling that those European leaders that have continued to push this narrative lose elections. They lose elections to right-wing national populist movements that are increasingly skeptical of this war, of the EU's approach to this, and are looking for an alternative. Now, Merz's soon-to-be government in Germany is going to hobble and cobble together everyone other than AfD to keep this thing going. I don't know how stable that government is going to be. Macron is not popular. Starmer is not popular. Last I checked, the UK Reform Party is the most popular. They're not going to win a majority, but that says something about the grumblings from below. And so I think that this is also a wake-up call for Europe in the idea that they cannot keep doing the same thing. If at first you don't succeed, keep smacking your head against the wall until either the wall or your skull breaks. It's not going to work. Now, what do they do in terms of saving grace? You cannot, unfortunately, just turn around and say to Lavrov or Putin, "You're right, we were wrong. Oops. Tell you what, let's just mend fences and, we'll figure out what to do with Ukraine." That's not how it's going to happen, as much as the analysts would like it to be. Europe, I absolutely agree with James. I will be damned if World War III starts because of some stupid thing Lithuania does over Kaliningrad. Or any of those Baltic countries, for that matter. I will be damned if World War III starts.
So hang on,
because Kaja Kallas needs to make a point.
Yeah, but Michael,
I
one
will be
point on
damned
this.
if
When
that
I talk
happens.
about offensive, taking it to Russia, I don't necessarily mean invading Russia. What I more meant was sort of, the Europeans get a little bit more assertive in trying to directly be present in Ukraine. and contribute towards their campaign more
The
than
only
just,
thing, okay, but
more
what are
than
we
simply
talking
just
about? A
protecting
military
Europe,
campaign?
right? There's
Because
a
if we're
difference
talking about
between
if we're talking about a
going to
military
Ukraine
campaign,
versus protecting Europe, right? The
sure.
Europeans might even in a more dark world think the Ukrainians are somewhat expendable, right? I'm sure there's plenty of policymakers in parts of the European continent who, that's why the NATO argument with Ukraine is a prime example of this, right? They've always said Ukraine will be in NATO. Ukraine deserves to be in NATO, but they've never actually promised a time horizon over that. So there's promises made, pledges made, but really
These are
Europeans
empty
aren't going to go that
promises.
far, right?
In order to get into NATO, you need unanimous support.
Yeah.
Slovakia has said no. Hungary has said no. Germany and France have said no. I mean, it's a fool's hope that Ukraine is going to get into NATO at this point, because these countries do not want to antagonize Russia. They don't want to create this security dilemma. If you want something beyond, ultimately, if you really want to think about solutions, I would say let Trump almost continue to destroy the transatlantic alliance that has existed since 1945 to the point where the U.S. just washes its hands of NATO, and let Europe inherit what's left and have its own collective security organization.
Christ, Michael, you're sounding very Macca now.
I mean, look, everything is on the table at this point. Everything is on the table.
Listen, I think, look, I don't call me idealist. I still think that it's possible to maintain a transatlantic relationship. I would hope that we can do. I think we have to recognize what Trump is, what he stands for, how he acts, and how he sees the world, and accommodate that. I think we need to be far, far more transactional in talking to him and talk the language of money and deals, because that clearly is what he is obsessed with. Previous US leaders would understand. I mean, you didn't need to discuss with previous US leaders the fact that US power is based on paying for it in one way or another. I mean, that essentially is what a lot comes down to. That if you want to be the world superpower, if you want to be the world hyperpower, that you want to have the world's reserve currency, you've got to be prepared to have, to pay for that. Trump comes in and just sees this as exploitation. Why are we paying? Doesn't see what is being bought. And so I think that this is where, and this is exactly where, if you consider Trump speaks the language of money, that is the ground that the European Union is by far strongest on. They can say, listen, we are still a huge single market, the largest single market in the world by overall wealth. All right. We understand what you've been saying about Europe not spending enough on defense. We're upping that. We understand what you're saying about the United States can't provide that anymore, or can't be the sole provider or the main provider. We understand that. We're taking steps to remedy it. But also start speaking, as I say, very clearly. We understand that you also regard China as the big threat and not Russia. It's reversed in our case. But we can actually see both of them are in an alliance with each other, and how do we tackle them? I think that, as I say, Europe really, there are smart ways that you can deal with this. But I completely agree with you that Europe will not benefit by trying to make this military in itself. It needs to up its defense, but it very much is about a defense posture when it comes to military. Nobody, I think, you'd have to be a loon to start talking about Kaliningrad and making direct threats against that. I mean, you can cut access to it and make it very difficult. Say to Russia, look, we're sovereign states. We don't agree with what you're doing. But yeah,
that's what I mean. That's a good point, James. I think that's more what I meant. Where it's just sort of more not directly taking kinetic action towards Russia, but more.
Yeah, just simply saying we're just going to make it very difficult, and you've got to understand that there are consequences for your actions. But again, I think that we could be much smarter with sanctions and even more targeted. And I hear the point about imposing those on Orban, but the EU has just passed another bunch. And don't forget, it's money that is also Orban's big Achilles heel. He needs European money. I mean, seriously, everyone's saying, oh, Orban's great. He's standing up for Hungary and everything. Yeah, no, he's not. if he really was, if he had the courage of his convictions, he'd be leaving the European Union. He's not going to do that. He won't do it. And the Europeans know it, that he's terrified of losing that support, because that is what props up his regime at home.
So let's have a couple of. I want to ask a specific question to you guys. Then, you know, yesterday Starmer made the announcement that, you know, him and Macron particularly are going to try to develop their own version of a ceasefire format to put towards the Americans. What do you think that could look like? Maybe Michael, we'll start with you. What could that look like? But also, what's the viability of that?
I have no idea. My guess is that
Okay,
they're going
James.
to. Yeah. No, I mean, my guess is that they're going to reiterate what was agreed upon. What was it, this past summer or last summer? As far as still believing that Ukraine has any kind of leverage in all of this. Which, I mean, good luck getting the United States to get behind it, and then even better luck getting the Russians to even take it seriously.
Okay, James. I don't know. I mean, I haven't.
So, all right, if we're going to talk about all of this, is that Trump has gone about it completely the wrong way. That much is clear.
I think we know that. Stop stating the obvious.
No, I mean, but you know, there are people who are watching this who think that Trump has done a great job and don't understand what he's proposing that he's given away. So, essentially, the argument is. That's put to Russia is, okay, if we draw a ceasefire, there will be no recognition of this territory that has been taken. This remains Ukrainian territory in the eyes of the world. That will not change. At some point in the future, we can open up discussions on the modalities of reintegration, whether that's going to be high degree of autonomy or whatever. Now, people will be saying, well, you know, but this is absolutely this is pie in the sky, maybe, but that's the way that the international community has approached this, with the one exception of Kosovo before all the Serbs pile in. So that has got to be a fundamental point in this. There can be no recognition of the legality of that territorial acquisition. It's got to be backed up by troops on the ground, European NATO troops on the ground. Now, that you're right, it's not likely that Ukraine would be taken into NATO. I think some would argue that that has to be the way that it should be. I think it's probably going to be difficult to get that. Most importantly, it's got to be phased on. Any rewards going to Russia, lifting of sanctions, has got to be predicated on a certain number of things that Russia is doing to rehabilitate itself. There has got to be talk about compensation. There's got to be talks about prisoner exchanges, all the children who were taken, all the civilians that have got to be returned. You know, there are issues. There are also going to be issues of what do you do about war crimes and things like that. So it can't be. What Trump has essentially done is we want to draw a line and we want to trust Russia and we want to open up trade with it. That is completely the wrong way of dealing with all of this. It's about saying to Russia, those sanctions will only be lifted if you meet certain key conditions. And it will be a slow, very slow process, but ultimately it is about, reintegrating those territories back into Ukraine. And you might not like to hear that, but that will remain the position. And unless you can sign on the dotted line to, that is a long time. And that actually can be a face-saving way out for Russia.
Do you think that's realistic, James? Any of this is realistic to really think about?
Well, it's no more or less realistic than what we do in other situations.
The magnitude of this, I think, is more than anything else that comes to mind.
Yeah, but that's precisely coming back to my original point. If you don't accept if you do accept the magnitude of this, then you understand the danger of allowing Putin to keep those territories, because that rewrites international affairs. So what you're saying to Putin is, listen, we aren't going to do that. And we are going to maintain that principle of territorial integrity, something that Russia actually, funnily enough, before Ukraine also used to be an arch conservative about.
Yeah,
you're saying to Russia, we are giving you a face-saving way out. If you want to make this about protecting the Russian speakers of Eastern Ukraine, this is what we're going to do. And then you can talk about the security guarantees for them as well. And I come at this from having looked at the case of Cyprus for many years and having looked at the Balkans. This is very much the sort of approach that has been taken there, all right, without success so far. But this is the general principles that have been put down, and we put down in all sorts of other conflicts, because this adheres to international law as it has developed over the past 80 years, and as I think, and I can constantly say, I think is worth preserving, because the alternative really is a very, very worrying world. So yeah, you might say it's not realistic at the moment, but it's better than the alternative.
Yeah, so what I would say to that again is, I very much would like to retain the international order that has benefited us.
All right, Piotr, tell me, so what's your plan then? How would you see this playing out?
Well, I think that a lot of what you say, I would love to see, but I just feel that it's all based on principles that are largely being thrown out of the window by so many that we've thought would be the biggest upholder of them, i.e. the US. Also, this presumption that that international law or rule of law is still functioning as effectively as it does, right? There is we're having conversations now with who are some of those senators, some senior officials saying that we should just US should just get the hell out of the UN, NATO. At the rate that things are going, I was like, haha, yeah, right. Now I'm actually like, well, could they actually just exit both? Right? I feel like you're still doing it predicated on the belief that somehow the international order, as we know it, is still going to be functioning at any point. Like the Europeans are literally going to be having to operate within a complete void of anything that we've gotten used to. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I have a better plan necessarily. I just feel that if the Europeans are going to go at it, like to talk about the idea of war crimes, as much as I think that is an absolute necessity, I can't see that even being a remote priority, because that means that you have to get some way of an even remote degree of agreement from Moscow.
Yeah, but let's also talk about this. Merz is about to invite Netanyahu to Berlin, so let's not even think about this notion of war crimes.
But that's what I mean. I just don't think it's not even as much as it should be kept in the conversation. I just don't think it's going to be worth highlighting, because
there's different ways of looking at it.
Okay,
and you've just made that point. It's sort of saying that what are the rewards that you offer to Putin for good behavior, and we would need to work out exactly what those would be. So no violations of ceasefire lines, because that is always a danger when you're dealing with these situations. A very, very tight leash on any Russian troops sitting on the other side of that ceasefire line. All of these things, handing over those, as I say, any prisoners of war, handing over any civilians, all of these things are things. It is a very, very complex negotiation, and I don't think Trump, when he was putting this down on the table, had any idea of all of this. He just thinks, "Oh, let's call a ceasefire," and that's it. It isn't. It will be a lot more, and you've got to bake in a long-term settlement, or at least keep the door open to a longer-term settlement in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, I don't disagree with any of that. I just am skeptical about the likelihood that you're even going to get that far with Putin.
Well, I think most people would say, and Putin's got no interest in trying to pursue a settlement on realistic terms. And this is why what Trump did was so wrong and so unhelpful, is that he marched in and gave Putin what Putin wanted as a victory from all of this. He didn't say, we cannot accept Russian sovereignty over this territory. We can accept a ceasefire that for the meantime will just accept that Russian troops are where they are. But we have to be looking to a longer term settlement that will maintain the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And if you feel it necessary to then say also, and respecting the fact that Russia has concerns, not even legitimate concerns, but concerns about Russian-speaking population.
So based on maximalist ideals, but with minimalist expectations.
And just simply recognizing, you can do this that maintains a lot of what, and get Ukraine to come out with some statements saying, yes, we will enter into talks about what we do with the East, and respecting the rights of Russian-speaking minorities or communities there. So use the word community, not minority.
Right, we have to sort of placate certain Russian expectations. We have to placate Putin.
Yeah, but so it's not even appeasing Russia. It's saying it's fundamentally sticking by the principle that Ukraine's territorial integrity remains intact ultimately, but recognizing that you have to reach political settlements on the ground. I think many in Ukraine would probably recognize that that would be a win at this stage, if it's about maintaining Ukraine's territorial integrity. Look, there are all sorts of ways that you can deal with all of this.
Vlad, who's watching. Hey Vlad, thanks for commenting. Everyone, if you're not familiar with Vlad, he's a great, I think.
Hello, Vlad.
Political.
We want to get you in on one of these.
Yeah, we'd love to have you on, but I don't know if you're in the position to do so at the moment. But yeah, we wanted to just give a shout out to Vlad. Michael, I'm sure you and Vlad would have a good back and forth over certain themes as well. But I don't know, Michael, what do you think about everything that's being said at the moment?
I mean, ultimately this goes back to what we started out this conversation with, and what this three-way conversation has always been circling about, and that is international law versus realpolitik. And right now we are in realpolitik. Trump is somebody who really has neither the time nor the interest in reading about international law. He will ram through an agreement that will be met with high receptivity from people like Putin or Xi Jinping or Erdogan or any other strongman like that, right? It's just, international law is, the Europeans can talk about that in your little kiddie table, in London. And then just please remember, Piotr, if you have access to, the British government, the three little guys, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, were very upset that they were not invited even to the kiddie table. So please make sure that you, pass on the notes to them as well, because they do feel that they are somehow, relevant. I mean, they might be pebbles that start an avalanche, but that's just how it is. I mean, look, to get all serious,
are you trying to be as provocative as that?
Like I said before, I will be damned if World War III starts because of some stupid thing either of those three countries do over Kaliningrad, just for the sake of international law. I mean, I'm sorry, but okay. In all seriousness, here, a realistic scenario over some kind of future deal with Ukraine is always going to be the question of recognizing the loss of territory, which the EU may very well not do. And if this never really reaches the UN, then it is effectively a de facto agreement instead of a de jure. So that leaves things ambiguous, just like Kosovo, right? In the sense that people can believe what they want to believe about what is effectively a disputed territory. I think what we may also see is the hope that Trump is a hiccup and that he will alienate the American voters to such a degree that the Democratic Party could, throw anybody, any cardboard cutout, and the opposition in 2029, and win. In which case Trump leaves and we go right back to normal. Things go right back to where they were. If Ukraine can somehow eke it out for another 3 years or so, if we can keep Ukraine surviving, which is what we've been doing, we basically have been keeping them surviving in perpetuity every, month and a half or so. Then we can come to a better agreement. We can renegotiate, maybe drag Russia, drain its resources. War fatigue will rise. Putin's not getting any younger. There's lots of things that we do without calling it a frozen conflict, but we'll make it a frozen conflict just simply to avoid a definitive solution to where a better opportunity in the near future presents, I guess.
So I want to make a couple of, I think I want to put in a couple of points. James disappeared. Where is he? He's back.
Back again. Sorry about that. Right? Technical glitch at my end.
It's okay. I just want to bring some updates from the meetings that's actually happening at the moment. So Frederick Merz has actually, because he's not at the meeting today, for everyone watching at the moment, there is the Securing Our Future Summit, I think is what they're calling it in London, as we speak, about 20 minutes from me. So I might wander down there after this and do some live or something. But at the moment, the Frederick Merz, who's the incoming chancellor, has made it clear that, he wants to be much more bullish and proactive over European security, to the point where he's even, discussing the idea of sharing nuclear defense capabilities with the UK and France, because of the shift in European security architecture because of the Trump administration. Couple of key points here, though, and this is what I want to probably get your reactions from, guys, which is, it goes without any surprise, I think, that the summit in London is under intense scrutiny in Moscow. Things have played very well for Putin, given Friday and other things. And so the Europeans' efforts to sort of try and overcome their internal divisions rise to the occasion of taking more ownership and be that bridge between the US and Ukraine now. Is something that Moscow's going to be frustrated by. But this is what I think is fascinating. So Lavrov signaled a shift in that. He claimed, quote, "All the world's tragedies have either originated in Europe or happened because of European policies," and insisted that America has played, quote, "no role in instigating conflicts." That's a bit of a contradiction to the policy and rhetoric he's always ever said about what the United States has done. That's interesting sort of U-turn there, Mr. Lavrov. Michael, is he just playing to America now to get through that US-Russian relationship now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even when Putin was asked last year who he would choose, who he would support as president, Biden or Trump, Putin said, absolutely Biden. No problem. We can work with him. Trump is unpredictable. And a lot of people read through that simply because they knew that, Biden is predictable. We know exactly what he would do, what he would say. Trump can, play things ultimately to his advantage. The fact that the entire Trump administration, while you were reading this, I was going on Telegram. Marco Rubio has now once said that he does not even know if peace in the world is even possible because of Europe getting in the way. Check that out. Because of Europe getting in the way. What this leads to, I mean, if you want to read between the lines, is, Russia, the US, reaching some kind of rapprochement of convenience, realizing that let's let the big boys talk while Europe figures out what to do with its own ego. And when they come up with some kind of convoluted solution, we'll have signed on the dotted line and made an agreement, which will make it even more problematic for Europe. So, yeah, interesting statement from Lavrov, but not surprising.
Really? Okay, James.
Sorry, Piotr, I was momentarily distracted. What exactly did Lavrov say?
Wow. Lavrov has basically said, quote, he has insisted that all the world's tragedies have either originated in Europe or happened because of European policies, insisting that Americans have played no role in instigating conflict. Okay, so what's he been saying for the past 20 years about America and what?
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of Russian fellow travelers who are absolutely appalled by that and dealing with cognitive dissonance. How do they?
Are we in parody land right now? I thought we were in clown land.
I know it's truly amazing, and it'll be the message. It'll be read out to Trump, and Trump will be nodding his head and saying, "Yeah, absolutely, it's those Europeans." I mean, at this stage, and yeah. You just have to.
This is basically for either Trump or Elon to retweet. That's ultimately what it is.
Exactly.
This is. I mean, look, Lavrov is an incredibly smart man. He is incredibly capable, and yet at the same time, this is absolute cannon fodder. This is absolute fan service for the Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean,
think this guy sums it up nicely.
Love it.
Hang on, I'll put it back up for you, mate.
I mean, if this isn't the title of a sitcom, I don't know what is.
Two liberals and a Marxist walk into a bar.
Yeah, but I hope if nothing else, I've shown that yes, look, I believe in the sort of international law and everything like that. But that's not about rolling over and having your belly itched. It's sort of recognizing that there are still very real and tough ways that you can work within that system. And the big problem I have really is about that 300 billion. I'm still a bit torn on what you do, but I think I am now moving into that camp of saying that we need to use it. And perhaps sending out another message. I mean, look, there's two ways you can look at it. And this is the big debate about it, is that does that undermine Europe's credibility as a destination for foreign investment if countries feel that at some point then Europe could steal their money? And I understand why there is a lot of concern about this in certain quarters. Germany is very concerned about this. The European Central Bank is very concerned about this. But on the other hand, there's an argument to be saying that, look, what we're seeing in Ukraine is unprecedented, that it has caused death and destruction on a scale that we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War, and that something needs to be done about it. And this is about the only way that where Europe can really exercise its leverage on it. So, you know, it's an important debate to be having. But I think certainly on Lavrov's comments, I mean, as we've sort of said, that is absolutely designed for retweeting, isn't it? It's just, I mean, it is parody. It is parody that, you know, you've had the Russians complaining about America's bullying behavior for 20 years and everything. And then Lavrov just comes out and says this simply in order to drive a wedge because he knows this is a lovely soundbite that will be welcome. But I come back, I think, to the point I made at the start of all of this, which really concerns me, is the people who are cheering what we're seeing on at the moment. That I think that, you know, really one has to wonder.
So what do you think
there is a certain deluded...
Well, as I put this in my post on X, I mean, I just wrote very bluntly, what did I write? MAGAs are so disillusioned with their idolization of Trump, they are missing, either knowingly or not, what basically feels like a complete disintegration of Western unity and alliances that have contributed to the US being as powerful and prosperous as it has been.
Disillusioned or deluded?
Disillusioned with their idolization of Trump. People are so in love with what Trump stands for in some ways, either because they know that he can benefit them and their self-interest, someone like David Sachs, or people who are just too dumb to really understand the severity of what Trump is doing in the long term, right? You know, they may benefit, quote unquote, in the short term in terms of America no longer having to spend money on whatever, but in the long term, it obviously is a net negative for the Americans. But, you know, I kind of curious for your guys' opinions about Musk and others saying that the US should pull out, like, even the UN, right? Things that really are a bedrock of international, just anything, right? Michael, I don't know.
We'd finally get a state of Palestine. Thank God. We would finally, by all means, please pull out of the UN. Take Israel's security blanket away. Absolutely. Fantastic. Pull out of the security, make Palestine the 100.
You look so over it. Both of you are over this conversation, I think, at this point.
I mean, you know, I just find it ironic. You know, there's an inverse relation. The louder you talk about Ukraine, the more silent you are about Palestine. You know, I've got one person that I know in my group of colleagues here that talks about both Palestine and Ukraine. And not surprisingly, he's a Ukrainian. That's the only one. It is just absolutely amazing. Within this last week, everybody has blown the dust off of their I stand with Ukraine hashtag, and yet they have remained quiet as anything for the past year and a half about Palestine. Europe cares about all the human rights violations that have happened in Ukraine, yet they've said absolutely nothing. Pro-Palestinian rallies in Germany, or Merz has said he's going to even crack down even more on that because it's anti-Semitic. I mean, just the hypocrisy is astounding. It just, I cannot take any of that seriously.
You still have, what, 140 countries that recognize Palestine? I mean, it's not as though, you know, I think we can all agree, but you've also seen cases brought before the ICJ. A lot has been held up because of the US veto. I think it's rather unfair to sort of tar everything with the same brush and just say blanket. I think in actual fact, the problem is actually a little bit, not more complicated than that, but certainly it's a little bit inverted, that what you have is a large chunk of the world says we recognize a certain legality to do with Palestine, which has been held up by the United States. And I think that Europe in many ways has actually been saying, and there is a legality that needs to be upheld in the case of Ukraine, which large parts of the world have ignored. So I think it's looked at from one particular vantage point that would say that. I think that there's a lot of others who would say and recognize that United States. So really, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's a very different conversation that we need to be having about Palestine, and it's a hugely important conversation, and it has gone off the radar, and something needs to be done about that. I mean, that, you know, and that ties in with all Trump's. I mean, how quickly time has gone. We've forgotten all about Trump's statements on Gaza that really, you know, have also upset a lot of people.
Or the AI video.
I agree. I mean, I think, you know, we do desperately need to have a proper conversation, not the three of us have a conversation, but I mean internationally, about what happens with Palestine. This has gone on for very long, far too long, and is an important issue for large parts, you know, certainly of the Middle East. And this is the other point I would also say, that from an American point of view, I don't think they understand just how sensitive this issue is for Europeans, the question of Ukraine. And people would say, oh, you know, why does Europe care so much about Ukraine but doesn't care about Palestine? Because Ukraine is part of Europe, in the same way that much of the Middle East doesn't care about Ukraine but does care about Palestine. We all have to recognize, yes, there are certain elements, and it's using that language. And again, I mean, it comes back to that point that engaging with Trump, what does Trump seem to care about? He seems to care about China. And so it's having that conversation and just saying, listen, United States, you care about China in the same way that we care about Russia, in the same way that the Middle East cares about Palestine. And I think Europe can actually, if it got its act together, could be an important bridge on all of that. Because remembering, of course, there are a lot of European countries that have recognized Palestine. I mean, there's a lot of key ones that haven't. But, you know, I think, how do we get to having that conversation about how do we restore order? By the way, can I just quickly say, because I'm noticing the usual hypocrites about Kosovo comments. Guys, Serbs who are saying this, can we just take a moment to pause and just remember that every time you accuse the West, the countries, of being hypocritical about not respecting territorial integrity of Serbia, please remember at the start of the 1990s, Serbia wasn't really up on the territorial integrity of Bosnia and Croatia. All right. So can we just bear that in mind? Because I just hear this the whole time, as though this holier than thou, you know, the West has ignored, you know, the territorial integrity of Serbia. Yet Serbia's not, it's done its own part in all of this. And, you know, I've been very critical about Kosovo's UDI, but sometimes I just need to feel that I have to push back on a particular Serbian narrative, which conveniently forgets it wasn't such a champion of territorial integrity itself. Sorry, just had to slip that in there.
Yeah, I think you guys are going to go.
I just keep seeing the comments, and it's just infuriating. Sorry.
Well, I think we need to try, and otherwise we could get to everything. I guess, guys, what would you say as we, I don't know, we've been going for almost 90 minutes, and I don't feel like we've got any closer to some kind of remedies here, or is it not remediable?
I mean, I think that, ultimately, this is the thing, is unfortunately you get all of the possible solutions or recommendations, you know, among people that are, you know, sort of paid to analyze this stuff. And yet at the same time, the political leaders do just the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could be very wrong on this, but I don't expect any collective statement coming out of this meeting in London to be anything different. I expect them that they will somehow try to convince themselves that they will pick up the mantle that Trump threw down because they owe it to Zelensky, they owe it to Ukraine, they owe it to Europe, they owe it to Moscow, and we cannot give in to Putin. And the response from Moscow will be, okay, we're either going to ignore you and cut a deal with Trump, or you want to go up against us, by all means. You know what? Let's just see how long this takes, because you don't have the military capability, you don't have the economic funds, and you also have a group of angry people in your country that vote. So I mean, there you go. So Russia likes to play the long game. If Europe wants to foist itself on principles, that's perfectly fine and good. I haven't disagreed with anything that James has said. It's probably one of the few times that you'll find a Marxist, finding commonality with a centrist in this regard. I'm a bit of
no. We're both liberals, right? We're both liberals.
you
and
two are, yeah.
Marxist,
I'm the I'm the
yeah.
the,
I've saved the comment. We got it right here, right, verbatim. I love the contrast of two liberals and a Marxist guy.
That's basically
at least they think you're a guy, eh, Michael? That's a good comment as well there.
That's the Marxist guy. That's good. So to just sort of wrap up my thing, is that I don't expect anything different. I think that the United States has made it extremely clear that the Trump administration, as well as the Republican Party, which is now falling into step with Trump now. This is a very different Trump administration than the first one, in which there were still naysayers and potential defectors. Now, everybody is marching in step with Trump. And when liberals start looking at the musings of Liz Cheney and John Bolton as the voice of reason, we have no opposition in this country. That there is no other alternative to this. Trump is going to get what he wants. So Europe, if it wants to forge an independent foreign policy, I wish it the best of luck. I'm a skeptic, but there's one day where I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, I have no problem admitting that I was wrong in this.
James?
I sadly agree that I think the trouble is we are going to see more of the same from Europe. That I think that they are on autopilot and just simply don't know how to deal with this. I think the bigger problem that we have in many ways is it is that old, going back to the 1990s, who do you call in Europe? I think my big concern is that there isn't an overarching figure that Trump would deal with now or respects. And that is the real problem. Look, Macron has been, Starmer has been. They both played the flattery. I think that's how history is going to judge that. I mean, it does seem a couple of days later, then we had what happened with Zelensky, and a lot of people feel that Trump just hadn't taken on board what those two leaders had said. But I think the trouble is we are dealing with somebody in Trump who does respect authoritarian leaders. And who is it that could go along and who he would respect? And I think that this is if we are to boil it down, the biggest problem. I think it's one, Europe needs to craft a message, a tough message, but it needs the right person to deliver that tough message. And I think it's missing both of those elements at the moment. It needs to be very, very clear, right? Okay, if it is to go to him and present an alternative, what is the alternative that allows him to walk away from this feeling like a winner? And preserving so Europe's got to think, right, okay, what is it the end goal that we want in all sorts of ways? What is it the end goal we want for Ukraine? What is the end goal we want for European security? What is the end goal we want for the international system? So trying to preserve those rights of territorial integrity and things like that. And thinking, right, okay, so that's the end goal. How best do we deal with Trump to get to that end goal? And as I say, then having the right person. And I think we're missing all of those elements. And that's the real problem that we've got at the moment. And this is not a new problem. This is 30 years that we've been trying to deal with this problem of who speaks for Europe. Now, certain steps have been taken. You do have a European External Action Service. You do have a European Foreign Minister. But doesn't come with the authority. The president of the European Council, but then you've got the internal fighting over who takes precedent, the president of the European Council, the president of the European Commission, individual leaders. Is Merz going to be the person who could potentially do this? He's going to be new into the job, and it's a tough ask. Macron, I think, was impressive. I think Starmer, my old thing, I think we're weakened in the UK by the fact that, not part of the European Union, difficult. I think he sees more of a bridge builder than a leader. And I think actually, as I say, you need somebody who can speak tough to Trump. So Yeah, but there are cards. I know that we're not playing cards here, as Zelensky said the other night, but, you know, I think Europe does have a lot more cards if it learns how to use them and learns to play the game.
I would just say at the end, as I said in the beginning, I think a great way to end this is to footnote the speech, the address that Jeffrey Sachs gave to the European Parliament. I think that is the far more, as far as Europe is concerned, as far as what should Europe do, where does Europe now go in this brave new world. This is a video that I cannot recommend more than this. So everybody definitely look for it on YouTube.
Yeah. I called the show The Global Gambit for a reason. And right now, Europe has a very specific set of gambits it has to consider. I think that a lot of people will feel politically homeless right now. I certainly do. I certainly don't know how to feel about all these things that are happening and at the rate that they're happening. I think it's not just the sort of the speed, it's the magnitude of them. And it is make or break for Europe at this point, right? You can be critical of Europe or whatever. You know, even while some of you have been chatting, I've been reading some posts here and there, and one of them is just sort of Europe is a dead continent. Scott Ritter, who is a very known nutcase commentator on the other side, is has said that it's a diseased continent. I don't think Europe's a diseased continent. I think it's just gotten lazy, complacent, all the keywords that I've already said, and I think we've touched upon. And I think that a part of me likes to hope that this time will be different, that Europe is going to be acting differently and actively leading the charge and trying to bridge the gap. But part of me is also very fearful that it's not going to, or that they will lapse into conventionality, right? As you said, James. And I think that there are inconsistencies, right? Meloni has a different style of approaching this than Macron does, than Starmer does. And that's also because Italy is a lot more, I don't know if sympathetic is the right word, but there is not as such a fervent support for Ukraine, unlimited, unconditional support for Ukraine amongst Italians as there is in, say, Britain. It's noticeable if you travel around parts of Europe, you know, how much earlier on in the war there were flags of Ukraine flying around. And it's this subtle divergence, let alone the power structure, right? Which individual is the one who can lead the charge, be it European or a nation state, right? That's going to also make it even harder. And I'm of the belief that, you know, it's the Europeans are going to make a lot of pledges, maximalist pledges based on idealistic goals, but ultimately Ukraine might not come out of this as optimally as the Europeans might like. And they're going to have to play some dirty politics with the Trump administration to get them back in the room to even begin, you know, to repair what's been done in the past 48 hours. So, you know, the part of me that hopes for one thing is conflicted by the part of me which is much more expecting of another one. But yeah, we've touched upon it, and maybe we can reconvene in a week to discuss, or sooner, what comes of this meeting at the moment.
And trying to think what happens a week from now, given every week we've come back thinking.
Well, is Trump hosting anyone at the moment? I think the main thing is to watch is to Europe at the moment. I'm just looking here to see if there's any updates. Not that I can see. So they are still ongoing as we speak. The talks are ongoing. You know, I think, to be honest, if I had to put it in a singular person, I think Macron's approach to sort of, you know, hand on arm of Trump when he was there and being very blunt, sort of like, no, let's not frame it like that. That's not quite representative, right? Is maybe as best as we can do. And that Macron or some like Zelensky and Trump can never just meet one-to-one again. It's not possible. And Europe has to be a lot more assertive in being like, we must be present in that room. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to get the best deal out of this, but equally, we're not going to make it easier for you, America, to do that sort of thing. And I think Europe has to take risks and have more conviction in that regard. But anyway, guys, I mean, unless there's anything else we want to mention, maybe we will leave it there for today.
I will be traveling next week. So a week from now, I will be in Armenia. for a couple of days, and then I will be traveling to Georgia for the sole purpose of just I need a couple of days for some good wine and some smoked cheese. So that's going to be my my side quest. It's spring break. It's spring break here, even though it's still just slightly below, slightly above freezing. But we're at the halfway point in the semester. So I'm taking.
Okay. Well, have a wonderful time. And,
Thank you.
You know, regards to Yerevan, a place that I know very well and very, very fond of, and it's a wonderful place. And Tbilisi, going through difficult times. Yeah, be interesting to hear your thoughts on coming back from from both places, because I think both it is.
Yeah,
Yerevan has been moving more in a Western direction, but I do also wonder if if they're going to be very nervous about pinning too much hopes on the West at the moment.
I don't want to open up another conversation here, but Armenia and Azerbaijan have yet to come to a final settlement.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is left of Karabakh? So, and who is going to be moderating that? That is another big issue.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. So look forward to hearing some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I might be able to just send a couple of comments in, but I may need to take the next weekend off. But then I can be back in 2 weekends I'm
not as the orchestrator of your funding from USAID, mate. I'm not going to be paying you for next week if you're not making an appearance. So
that's fine.
You're gonna have
that's fine. That's fine. I may have to take a personal day. It's all good. So.
Right.
Speaking of which,
try and live
speaking
off
of which, you mentioned USAID. I mean, I have a good friend and colleague here in Tashkent who is still working for USAID. Just to give an update on that, I mean, they are still here. They are still getting paid. They're getting these cryptic emails every couple of days from anonymous, just HR@gov or HR@doge.gov, basically saying resign or face the consequences. And they're all wondering, is this spam or not? It's just very, very, very weird. So for anybody that thinks that USAID has been effectively shut down, no, they are still very much here. They still are very much active. They're just simply waiting for some kind of clarity as to what's going to happen. And it's just, if Big Brother has taken over in the form of Elon Musk, he's even more unpredictable and childish than Trump could ever possibly hope to be.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. I do wonder how much, though, the relevance of even thinking about Azerbaijan and Armenia is worth it, given the events between the US and Europe at this point. I feel like any other geopolitical matter of that, not that Armenia and Azerbaijan aren't important, but they all feel sort of they are collateral in what the US and Russia want to do with their own interests and sort of the states. It's what we were talking about with great power competition and the big powers at the table carving up the world, and the little powers just have to sort of navigate it or get eaten up. It's we're completely in unknown charters, everybody. But hold on, as they said in Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts. So anyway, guys, thanks a lot. And check out these guys' profiles, do subscribe and support us as we are in a post-truth world, and we're just trying to make sense of it and make sure that everyone comes out as best they can. But take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.